Welcome back to my YouTube channel. In today's video, we will be covering another topic from French grammar, which is Pronon Relatif simple. So, as you might be already aware, and if you aren't aware, let me tell you that we have four Pronon Relatif simple in French. Two of them are there on your screen, que and qui, and another two are dans and ou, ou, with an accent on top of u. So in this particular video, we will be covering qui and que, and in the next part, we will be covering dans and ou. Ooh. Now let's get started. Before we get started with our pronom relatif sampler for today's video, which is que and qui, we will be going through the introduction part of pronom relatif sampler. What are the relative pronouns in French? Now, our very basic understanding of pronouns has always been there since our primary grade. We know what pronouns are. Pronouns are nothing but these are the words which replace the nouns in a sentence. Because we don't want the nouns to be repeated again and again, so we use pronouns to replace the nouns. The same thing applies in French as well. The relative pronouns are those words which are used to replace nouns in French. And we have four relative pronouns in French, as I just mentioned. These four are que, qui, ou, and dans. In this video, we are covering que and qui. Before that, I have this particular slide where we will be discussing some basics about clauses, because it's important to know about clauses if you want to understand where to use different relative pronouns in French. Particularly for this video, we have que and qui. Right, so in a sentence, we have two clauses. Very basic sentence, we have two clauses. The very first clause is your principal clause, and the another clause which is dependent on your principal clause is your subordinate clause. Or at times you even have two independent clauses in your sentence, जो कि आपस में connected नहीं होते in any way, but if the two clauses are dependent, right? The second clause is dependent on the first clause. Then in that case, the first clause is known as your principal clause and the second clause is known as your subordinate clause. This is like a very basic understanding of English, and the same thing is there in French as well. लेकिन मैं French में इनको क्या बोलते हैं, I wouldn't be putting those things forward in this particular video, because हमारा basic जो motive है इस video में, that is to understand about pronouns, right? Not about clauses. So you should know about these things in English. We have independent clauses and we have dependent clauses. This is to understand. Now here we have some sentences written in red and blue, right? Now if I read those sentences one by one, let's begin with the very first one, which is the cat is on the table, the cat is black. And the second one, the cat that is on the table is black. Now, which sentence, here's a very simple question, which sentence sounds better, the first one or the second one? It's obviously the second one that sounds better, because in the first sentence, we're repeating the cat two times, which is very unnecessarily being repeated. Whereas in the second sentence, the cat has been written only once, and we have used that instead of the cat in the second sentence. Sorry. So the second sentence makes more meaning and sounds much more attractive. Similarly, with the second example as well, you read the book was long. Whereas this one sounds much better, which is the book that you read was long. So I hope with the help of these two examples, which I've given in English, you will be able to understand in French much better. This is exactly what pronom relatif simple does in French as well. What it does is it limits the repetition of nouns so that a sentence becomes much more comprehensible and much more attractive. So let's begin with the very first pronoun that we have, which is que. So in French, we use que when we are replacing an object of the subordinate clause with a relative pronoun. Now, don't get so much into the vocabulary that I've used over here. We'll be understanding this with the help of a very simple example. But इसमें कहना क्या चाह रहे हैं in this particular theory part, it's saying that French में हम कर तब use करते हैं जब हमें subordinate clause. What is subordinate clause? The subordinate clause is the clause which is dependent on the principal clause, the very first clause. The second clause which is dependent on the first clause. So in this scenario, the second clause is your subordinate clause, right? Now इस sentence में subordinate clause है ये second sentence, ठीक है? And second sentence का object है ये le livre. Livre means the book, right? So this is your subordinate clause and this is the object of your subordinate clause. So que is used to replace the object of the subordinate clause. And this is the object of the subordinate clause. Therefore, you will be using que to replace le livre. And बहुत ही basic अगर हम अपना sense लगाते हैं, so we'll get to know कि इधर दोनों sentence में le livre repeat हो रहा है. इधर भी le livre, here also we're having le livre. So it's being repeated 2 times. So it becomes quite obvious कि हम जो pronoun use करेंगे वो le livre को replace करने के लिए use करेंगे. लेकिन आप कौन सा use करें? क करें या की करें, दो करें, ऊ करें, कौन सा करें? That is the question, right? हमें ये तो पता चल गया कि हमें किसको replace करना है? le livre को. क्यों? क्योंकि ये 2 बार repeat हो रहा है. तो एक बार पहले sentence में and the second time it's getting repeated in the second sentence. राइट तो हमें ल livre रिप्लेस करना. अब करेंगे किससे? क से करेंगे. हाउ डिड वी नो कि हमें क से करना है? बिकॉज वी नो कि वी यूज क व्हेन वी हैव टू रिप्लेस द ऑब्जेक्ट ऑफ द सबऑर्डिनेट क्लॉज. जब हमें सबऑर्डिनेट क्लॉज का ऑब्जेक्ट रिप्लेस करना होता है तो हम क यूज करते हैं. तो हम क्या करेंगे? ल livre. अब हम अगर इसको लिखें, इफ यू राइट द आंसर टू दिस क्वेश्चन, इफ द क्वेश्चन इज दैट राइट द सेंटेंस यूजिंग Pronon Relatif sample, so the answer will be le livre était long que vous avez lu. In this sentence हमने le livre ड्रॉप कर दिया बिकॉज हमने रिप्लेस कर दिया le livre किससे? क से. और क हमने कहा लिख दिया? सेंटेंस के बीच में. हमने इधर पे क लिख दिया एंड le livre हमने ड्रॉप कर दिया बिकॉज le livre we have replaced using क. So this is how your sentence is formed using Pronon Relatif sample क. Since object of the subordinate clause, we use que. As simple as that. Moving ahead to another Pronon Relatif sample which is की. Now की क का just उल्टा है. क हम यूज करते हैं उस नाउन के लिए जो कि subordinate clause का ऑब्जेक्ट होता है और रिपीट हो रहा होता है in both the sentences. But की हम यूज करते हैं उस नाउन के लिए जो कि दोनों sentences में तो repeat हो ही रहा होता है. It's getting repeated in both the sentences, right? But in the subordinate clause, it's not the object, unlike que in the case of que. It's the subject instead. So that's like the most basic difference. Que replaces the object, qui replaces the subject. So in French, we use qui when we are replacing the subject of the subordinate clause with a relative pronoun. Example, la règle est sur la table. La règle est jaune. The ruler is on the table. The ruler is yellow. Ruler being repeated 2 times unnecessarily. We have to omit this, right? So we know what will be replaced. La règle will be replaced because it's being repeated 2 times. So we have identified कि हमें replace क्या करना है. This is the first step. Second step, look at the second clause and try to understand कि जो la règle है वो second clause का object है, subject है. It is the subject. Very clearly visible. It is the subject. Verb से पहले आ रहा है, a से पहले आ रहा है, a से पहले आ रहा है. It is the subject. उसके बाद अगर होता है then it would have been the object. It's the subject over here. So हम इसको replace करेंगे की से. क्या करेंगे हम? La règle drop कर देंगे because हम इसको replace करें की से and की आ जाएगा आपके sentence के बीच में. तो आपका sentence ये बन जाएगा La règle est sur la table qui est jaune. The ruler is on the table which is yellow. Sorry. Now this sentence may seem a bit awkward, right? अगर मैं इसको इंग्लिश में translate करती हूँ, the ruler is on the table which is yellow. It would have been better अगर मैं इसको ऐसे translate कर पाती. The ruler which is yellow is on the table. So यही हुआ है हमारे इस आंसर में, right? This would have been correct, but not appropriate, right? There's a difference between correct and appropriate. This is correct and is appropriate as well, right? La règle qui est sur la table est jaune. In this, we have replaced la règle. हमने la règle जो दूसरी बार repeat होता है उसको drop कर दिया, की से replace कर दिया. बट की को हमने सेंटेंस के बीच में लगा के देखा, बट सेंटेंस का इतना अच्छा मतलब नहीं आ रहा था. तो हमने क्या किया, की को थोड़ा सा स्विच करके, थोड़ा सा उसकी पोजीशन को स्विच करके आगे रख दिया. And it's absolutely correct. La règle which is on the table is yellow. The ruler which is on the table is yellow, or in other words, the very first one, in the very first case that I mentioned before it was the ruler is on the table which is yellow, but more appropriate, you can guess it. Ruler is the subject of the subordinate clause, so we used key. Summing everything up, we talked about Pronon Relatif sample. Two Pronon Relatif sample we talked about in this video, que and qui. We use these for those nouns जो कि दोनों sentences में repeat हो रहे होते हैं. The first step is to identify those nouns which are getting repeated in both the sentences. Done. Next step. Just look at the second sentence and देखो कि second sentence में is the noun the subject or the object. If it is the object, use que, Q-U-E, right? And if it is the subject, use qui. As simple as that. Now, I'll be bringing the next video shortly. In that, we will be solving some exercises from que and qui, so that the concept will become much more clear and easy to understand. And the video after that I'll be bringing will be based on do and ou wale pronouns. They're also very simple to understand. Thank you for watching, and make sure you subscribe the channel, like, and leave any comment, regarding your doubts, or there's some suggestions that you might want me to give. They're all welcome. See you in the next video. Bye.